Hello and welcome to the ACA pre-back cruise speaker. That was terrible crowd, but luckily I'm not the speaker, I'm just introducing her. So, if you haven't heard of Mandisa Thomas, she's the president and founder of Black Nonbelievers, which has, at last count, unless I'm mistaking numbers, 13 active chapters currently. And she recently received the Unitarian Universalist Humanist Association's Person of the Year 2018. Among other accolades and recognitions that she's earned, an increasingly sought-after speaker. We're lucky and glad to have her, and so let me introduce Mandisa Thomas.
I'm a hugger, just so in case y'all didn't know already. Thank you all very much for having me here this afternoon for the pre-back cruise lecture. It is an honor to be here in Austin again. The last time I was here was in 2013, 5 years ago, for the American Atheist Convention. As Jamie said, I am the founder and president of Black Nonbelievers Incorporated, which is headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. The title of my presentation today is called Fear of a Black Atheist. And because I have more than about 20 to 30 minutes to talk, I'm going to get into the background of the title. So for those of you who aren't aware of my background, I am a native of New York City. And I just turned 42 years old, to which I have had some people tell me that I don't look like I'm older than about my mid-30s, which is nice. But the inspiration for this title came last year when I was speaking in the Northern California area. And one of the advisors for the Secular Student Alliance group at Sacramento City Community College we were trying to come up with a title. And he threw out some things that we wanted to have attendance for the talk, but we were trying to decide whether it would be provocative or not. So in coming up with some titles, the last one was that. And how many hip hop heads or hip hop enthusiasts are in the room? Yes, that's a good number. Who here is familiar with the hip hop group Public Enemy? Good. So then you know that they have an album called Fear of a Black Planet. And when I saw that title, I laughed out loud because it is very, very ironic and appropriate for a number of reasons. But at first I thought it might be a little bit too provocative. But then I talked to my sister Bria, who is on our board. There are many of you who know who Bria is, Bridget Crutchfield out of Detroit. She said, no, you have to use that. And it is good for a number of reasons because I'm here today to discuss issues involving Black atheists. And also, it is appropriate because of the current climate in the United States, as well as within the secular community. This title is even more crucial now than ever. At the last minute, I remember there was a clip from the Atheist Experience from years ago that featured our very own Matt Dillahunty. And I wanted to play a bit of that as we start. Okay.
Is it Janetta?
Yes, it's Janetta.
Janetta in Akron, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Fine.
Hi, I'm an atheist, I'm a Black atheist, and recently, last year around December, I actually became an atheist, and it became kind of hard for me. I made a YouTube, I didn't really know who to talk to. I just wanted to know, what do you think about the shortage of Black Americans being atheists? Why is it so hard?
Boy, wouldn't you know that better than us?
I mean, I don't know. I've tried to figure it out, but it just seems like white people are more open for some reason.
So maybe your question to us should be, why does it seem like it's so much easier for white people? But again, in not really having your experience to compare mine to, I don't really know.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. We actually had some calls a month or two ago when we were still doing the show from my place, where we talked about, why there don't seem to be as many black atheists. Now, whether or not that's true, I don't know. Maybe there's just as many when you consider, relative population sizes, but there are not as many outspoken, which just changes the question as to why are there, fewer outspoken. I don't know. I could guess about some things. I'd feel really bad. You're getting near dangerous territory of stereotyping. We've talked before about the kind of the possibility that all religion is some form of Stockholm syndrome, because it's always been absurd to me that the African American community would embrace the religion that enslaved them and took away their identities. And there's been a backlash about that on some fronts. And yet black Christian churches in America are some of the strongest, proudest, most vocal. And I think that it takes a long time to get past the mistakes. So the racist mistakes, the abusive mistakes, the civil rights mistakes that were made that we're gradually starting to correct. I can easily see a future where, not only is this not an issue, but it may be an issue the other direction.
Okay. So yes, to answer the question, yes, black atheists, we do exist. And there are a number of us, as well as other people of color in this room today, which is remarkable, especially considering a few years ago, or even a decade ago, when there weren't very many that were attending events in person. And I'm going to discuss a few reasons as to why that is during this presentation. It's not Q&A yet though, Matt.
I just want to say I have a much better answer to that question.
Yes, absolutely. That was dated in 2009. Yes, there are better answers to that question today. Thank you. So the pictures you see here are from the July and August 2018 edition of the Humanist magazine, which I have up here. In the 73 years of the American Humanist Association's existence, I don't know how long they've been publishing the Humanist magazine, but this is the first time they've ever had black women, atheists/humanists, on their cover. And there are 5 of us. Some of who I will discuss later on in this presentation. The second picture you see here is from a quote in the July and August edition or issue of Playboy magazine of 2018. It's fun to say I'm in Playboy without context. But people really do read it for the articles. The quote here is featured. The most encouraging moment of the 2018 American Atheist Convention weekend comes when I introduce myself to Mandisa Thomas, president and founder of Black Nonbelievers, an organization dedicated to support and visibility for Black atheists. The organization was founded simply because it was needed, and as an indication of the caller from the first clip, as well as the demographics within the secular community, as well as the Black community, our organization was needed simply. There has been the question asked, well, is there a difference? There are differences, and I'm about to discuss and explain why. So, religion does define the Black community, and here is why. The new Pew Research numbers show that approximately 87% of the Black community identifies as religious, whether that is whether it's Christian, Islam, what have you. Those numbers are still staggeringly high, even though the number of nuns, religious nuns within the United States are going up. The numbers in the Black community are still very, very high. Another reason is because slavery in the United States forced African captives to accept Christianity. This is significant for a number of reasons. Because of the forced acceptance of Christianity, as well as accepting the image of white Jesus in particular. This was extremely damaging to the psyche of Blacks in this country who were enslaved. And as with many people who historically are religious, it didn't start off because they wanted to. The captives who came over here had their own religions, they had their own cultures that were stripped from them, but they were forced to accept Christianity. And also, the Black church became the primary support once slavery and Reconstruction ended, and institutionalized racism was enacted and enforced. This is also important for a number of reasons. When you have a government and when you have a country that legally subjugates you and also terrorizes your community, that also does something to the psyche of a community. And being discriminated against because of your race. The church as an institution, though, provided that support for the Black community. There were many historically Black colleges and universities. I know there's one here, Houston-Tillotson. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. That is one of them. Many of them were started by and in churches. So when we're talking about an institution that was sustaining or helping to build that support for a community when it was needed, the church became that when legally Blacks had no support in this country. However, even with that, and again, you can go to Pew Research to find those numbers, but religion has crippled the Black community. And here is how. The Black church, the church in particular, has hijacked the image of the Black community historically and currently. Every time I ask this next question, it's kind of disheartening to see the responses. How many of you are familiar with Dr. Carter G. Woodson? Wow. So, Dr. Carter G. Woodson is the author of The Miseducation of the Negro. He is also the founder of Negro History Week, which is now Black History Month. He identified as a free thinker. So it's not like Christianity got all of us. Historically, there are Blacks that have been atheists, humanists, secular, freethinkers. The fact that no one's hand in this room went up upon being asked who Dr. Woodson was is indicative of not only an education problem, but also an information problem. Because as a community, we pride ourselves on this information. And when you ask the question of, well, why aren't there many Black atheists, or I didn't know any Black atheists, or you assume that our community is all religious, the fact that we don't know that the foundations of Black History Month were a free thinker is a huge problem. It ignores how Blacks became predominantly Christian in the first place. Again, it wasn't because our ancestors wanted to. It was either you accepted it or you died. But through that conditioning, and also through the conditions in this country, it has passed down through generation to generation. But it ignores the fact that even though as a building or as an institution, the church was helpful, it does not, the doctrines of slavery and subjugation did not change. And unfortunately, this is overlooked, or it's never thought of. It's never considered in a way that is considered to be a negative. It reinforces dependence on divine intervention. Now, there are many in the Black community who think that our obstacles and our struggles were through the grace of God or through the grace of the Lord, which isn't true at all. There were people, regardless of their faith or lack thereof, who realized that there were huge problems here that needed to be changed. There were laws that needed to be changed. There were rights that needed to be given to everyone. And this idea of when a white cop mistakenly goes into the apartment of a Black man and shoots him, that somehow God is gonna get the family through that. Or when these other things happen in our communities and that have happened, all of a sudden it's, well, we need to pray on it. No. Religion, Christianity, Islam, and all of that perpetuates homophobia, sexism, hypocrisy, etc. The Black church in particular is held up primarily by Black women. We know that as a religion, an institution, Christianity in particular is very, very cruel to women, not very kind to women. It already has not been kind to people. It has not been kind to people of color. It definitely has not been kind to women, as well as the perceptions about the LGBT community. In some denominations that is changing, which is good. But for the most part, especially when you look at the Black community, there is still a huge amount of homophobia there. There is a lot of sexism. There is a lot of the hypocrisy. And this hypocrisy and all of this tends to have people overlooking abusive actions that are committed by religious leaders and their people and their leaders, excuse me. So how many of you are familiar with the late Bishop Eddie Long? Okay, so if you're not familiar with him, Eddie Long, who ironically died on Dr. Martin Luther King's actual birthday last year, 2017. He was the pastor of New Birth Missionary Baptist Church, which is a mega church in the metro Atlanta area. This guy also marched with George W. Bush in 2004 protesting same-sex marriage. At the end of 2010, he came under scrutiny and under fire for carrying on relationships with with young men. I think they were at the age of consent, but barely. And most of the church said, well, he's still a man, he's not God, and they were so ready to forgive him for those actions. But isn't that often indicative of what we see in a lot of these religious leaders? They often preach one thing, but then they get caught doing exactly what they're preaching against. Irony and hypocrisy. That's what happens. And that is a prime example of that. The church takes money from the community, but does not sufficiently give it back. There is a good documentary called Black Church Inc., which discusses the fact that there have been billions of dollars generated by the Black church institutionally and collectively. We're talking over $400 billion since the 1980s. Because once the civil rights era ended, and the church did play a substantial role, even though it's inflated. After that was the advent of the prosperity gospel. And this is where you have a lot of your mega pastors, which encourage you, like the more you give to your church, the more your blessings will come. This has made many pastors very, very wealthy. But what it has done to the community the community is still underdeveloped. We are still hearing of a lot of health problems within the Black community, economic disparities within the Black community, and just this idea of blind faith and blind belief that is really, really inherent within our communities and amongst other people of color. We're talking about funds that really could contribute to generational wealth, that are going to these institutions that are only telling you to pray on your problems, or that if you do decide to seek some clinical help, it is only through God or through the religious leaders. And finally, it does keep people in fear and seeking actual help and also resources that are needed. I just discussed clinical help and seeking actual help. There are still many in the Black community who think that going to a therapist or going to an actual doctor is equated to like witchcraft or Satanism or stuff like that. I know in the South that is probably indicative of many communities. But when we're talking about almost every major city that has a predominantly Black population, this is still a very huge problem, that people are not seeking actual help and solutions. They may not be going to the doctor. They may just be going to their pastor or to their churches to just pray on it instead of getting the actual help they need. And having come from a family that is dealing with a lot of generational dysfunction, but yet they love their God and they love the Lord, but these problems are still continuing. There has to be, hopefully, another way in the near future. But in dealing with all of this, particularly within the Black community, when you ask the question of, well, again, why are there so few Black atheists? Because a few years ago, there weren't still very many, and even now, there's still a lack of representation. But we sought to resolve that in 2011, when Black Nonbelievers was formed. And the reason for that is, like Matt was saying previously, not that there weren't any Black atheists, it's just the representation was lacking. And so there had to be organized efforts. And after attending my first atheist meetup, in 2011, and beginning to understand what some of the folks that I had talked to online were experiencing. Part of the reason it was in Martin's response to the woman on the call, when he said, well, wouldn't you know? That is a sufficiently lacking and understanding response to someone asking a question. So, what we sought to do and what we are doing with Black Nonbelievers is, one, showing that there are more of us out here. These are just some examples of our meetings and events where you see that there are much more of us out here. And as an organization, we sought to, yes, bring more of us out, but also have these discussions and also bring and increase and build up that community of people who understood what was going on in our community. There's a good Wikipedia link called Atheism in the African Diaspora, which explains and discusses how Blacks, not just in the United States, but also in other areas of the world, what we have to endure and encounter amongst not just other Black folks, but also other people within the secular community when it comes to our identities as well as our experiences. So from that, since that time, not only have we been building that community, we've also been contributing to research and evidence. So the two books that you see here on the cover of the Humanist magazine, the author is Candace Gorham. She wrote the Ebony Exodus Project she released it in 2013, and it discusses why some Black women have been walking out on religion. There really hadn't been any other organizations or communities that within the secular movement that have been dealing with that or have been discussing that. So instead of waiting for it to happen, we created it. We started building that network and building that research and that evidence. as well as The Emancipation of a Black Atheist by Dr. Evans here. It's his own personal journey, but it was through connecting with our organization and speaking with our members that he was able to get more information and release his book. We have also been featured in other major media outlets. That is just one, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, The Humanist, and Playboy. We've also been featured on CBS Sunday Morning, on CNN. If you type in Black Nonbelievers, probably a lot of stuff comes up now. And I remember back in 2011 when we were asked to participate in our first video project. It was like pulling teeth to get people to participate, understandably, because they weren't sure how their families were going to take it. They weren't sure how their friends were going to take it. But since that time, we have actually been encouraging. Our members are now more encouraged. They feel more empowered to speak up. And so in the future, in the years that have passed since then, we've had more of our members speaking up. They have been coming out. They've become more comfortable with participating, not only with us, but also with other groups and other people. And last year, we launched our Being Changes Lives campaign. Over the years, we have received feedback that our organization has saved lives. And the campaign is a collection of testimonies from members and allies about their experiences with leaving religion, finding the organization and finding community, as well as being able to connect with more like-minded individuals and people who could understand where they were coming from. Here's another thing that we also deal with within the Black community and the Black atheist community, is that due to the very, very emotional tie to the church, it is as if being religious is synonymous with being Black. So if you are to openly express your atheist identity within the Black community, it is like you're giving up your Blackness. It is like you are giving up your culture. You are denying everything that we have been through in this country. And there is just such, again, an emotional connection to that, which makes it that much more difficult for people to openly identify. So in that, we also are defying this, this image of what it means to be Black, or what it means, because we don't have to give it up. As a matter of fact, yes, we can ask the question of, why do you still believe in this religion that has subjugated us? But also understanding why is important and why it is much more difficult for some people to let it go, but also knowing that there are more of us out here. And that is what some of our members and organizers have done through this. Some of the testimonies have shown how we have helped individuals in their time of need. We have helped in times of financial need. And sadly, though, the organizer of our Milwaukee affiliate died tragically and suddenly earlier this year. He was in his early 30s. So we do commemorate those who have come through our doors as organizers, as members, participants, and we've also cultivated a network of speakers and activists that aren't readily known within the secular community. We know they're out there, and we have been instrumental in bringing them out and showing that there are, again, more of us out here that just wasn't sitting back and waiting for something to happen. That we, again, took the initiative to bring ourselves out into the Black community, but also into the secular community where the representation is still needed. And on that note, we ask the question, are you really an ally or a /supporter? And that can come in, that can also mean other people of color who are believers, but primarily our white counterparts who are atheists and non-believers. The question of, well, how do we increase our diversity efforts? How do we work on that? How do we bring more people of color? How do we bring more women? How do we bring more young people into the movement? And so these questions are often asked of us. And I will say me in particular because, when I speak, the question does come up. Or it also has been asked of maybe the one or two Black atheists who happen to attend largely predominantly white meetups. That is often a question that we are asked. And we have seen a lot of lip service that is improving. That has improved in these past few years, but there has been the questions have been asked, but the actions have been lacking and the follow through has been lacking. So if you consider yourself an ally to our organization, to other atheists from marginalized demographics, I'm about to share some don'ts and do's with you. I'm gonna start with the don'ts first. First, don't assume you can't help. I can't tell you how many times I have had our tables set up and there have been people who did not think that our organization applied to them, so they just kept going. Also, this past Dragon Con, who here is familiar with Dragon Con in Atlanta? Yes, it is an amazing convention that takes place every Labor Day. I presented there on a skeptic track this year. And there was a gentleman who, after my talk, said he attended a panel the previous day, and that there was a Black woman on a panel about women in science and engineering. The woman said that she didn't think that there were any other Black atheist women out there. Came out of nowhere. And so he said, well, I just figured that would be something that you could speak to. I said, but I wasn't there. That was your opportunity to speak up. That was your opportunity to point her and show her not just that, not just our website, but also that we were there in attendance so that she could see us. So instead of being silent about it, you could have spoken up to say, hey, here is this organization here. Here are these Black women here. Here are these Black atheists. So never assume that you cannot help or assist with our efforts. Don't assume that we all care about the same issues or even think alike. The Black community is very diverse in itself. We don't all have the same experiences. Not all of us have come to our atheism and non-belief through painful or emotional ways. We don't all care equally about certain issues that are taking place in current events. The key is to ask questions. Definitely do not assume that even I speak for all Black atheists, because I don't. I don't know what everyone is thinking. Hell, rather. Not even all Black atheists like me, and that's fine. But that doesn't take away from the fact that there is more representation out there, and it is up to everyone in this room to start asking more questions on an individual basis and not try to apply everything collectively. That would be a very broad and brass assumption. Don't dismiss the importance of our groups. When we are explaining what goes on in our communities, the issues and the challenges that we have, especially being people of color and also being atheists, that is not your cue to say, well, we all go through that. Or, this is a problem that affects all of us. Well, it doesn't affect all of us equally. It really, really does not. And again, this goes back to the level of education and understanding of people from different backgrounds in this country. Even if you didn't know about it before or care about it before, when we are speaking, this is your opportunity to at least start listening. But yes, don't dismiss the importance of our groups, because if there wasn't a need for it, it wouldn't be here. And it isn't just for the secular community. I mean, I have heard that phrase, "I've never met a black atheist," from other black folks. And that was the main reason why our organization was formed. Don't become defensive when we discuss our concerns. So there is a lot of collective history that pertains to institutions of racism and systemic injustice that has been perpetuated by white supremacy and the white collective. This is something that everyone in this room needs to be aware of and understand. And so I'm not saying, well, you did this to my ancestors or you did this to me. But in discussing the history, it is important because white supremacy has negatively and badly affected all of us. And so that isn't an opportunity to say, well, I didn't, it isn't, like I said, it isn't an opportunity to take it personal, or that isn't your cue to take it personal, because really it isn't about you. It isn't even personally about me, but really it is about the problems that we face and what we need to do to turn it around. Please don't say, "I don't see color or race." That is often a huge problem and a barrier to the conversation. It's also very dismissive. Now, we don't deny or we don't discount that there are a lot of progressive folks. We understand that part. But to be dismissive or just say you don't see it means you really don't see it, which is often a reason why you may not have the discussion with more of us. Because once you start, again, being dismissive, or you say that you don't see these things, then you're not real. I mean, it is a barrier to the progression and working towards change. But here are the things that we all can do. Please do listen and learn, and I said that before. And also listen to understand and not just listen to respond. That is often a huge problem with some of the groups, and especially in a lot of these online forums. People are listening, they're becoming defensive, and they just want to react instead of listening and learning from what people have to say. Do adjust your attitudes and actions when presented with new information. If Phil earlier today showed me something where, a white person was saying something about rich niggers. Now, if someone is telling you that is a huge problem, that is not your cue to say, oh, well, you're being too sensitive. That is a word that, if at all possible, everyone should be avoiding. It is not, yes. So when you are presented, if you are doing something that you may not have necessarily seen or have been told is a problem before, please take the information, analyze it, reflect on it, and effectively try to change it. In our community, we are still dealing with people who people who do not understand their own sense of privilege, whether it is white privilege or male privilege or just class privilege. So you never know. Sometimes the people who you talk to may not say anything, but if they do, and if we do say something, please do make a genuine and concerted effort to evaluate and change it. Do make sure we are sufficiently part of the input. And that doesn't just mean asking us a question every so often or only when we are speaking, or maybe only once or twice a year. Do make sure that we are sufficiently a part of the conversation and a part of the input, especially if you are putting on events that you may want to appeal to different demographics. You make sure you are reaching out to those people of color. You make sure you are reaching out to the women and asking the questions, and also what can we do? And also being part of the input means incorporating more of us into leadership. That does make a huge difference. Do collaborate and participate. Our organization in particular we belong to the coalitions in the cities that we're in. So we will connect and collaborate and participate on joint efforts with other organizations. And it is important that the organizers and leaders within these groups do collaborate with other people of color and from other backgrounds. So even if there was an event that you might not have thought of, do consider it, even if you may think that there may be some backlash from participating. It doesn't hurt to do the research and ask and find out. And don't just collaborate with the intent on promoting your agenda or just promoting only what you do. Collaborate in hopes of everybody working together and reciprocating. Do have information and resources available. Resources about our organizations, now that you know we exist. If there is someone looking for us, you can point them in our direction. You can send them our way. And if there is something that you think that our groups can benefit from, please send them our way. It goes both ways. Also, do donate and support. So Black Nonbelievers is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are a community-based organization. We are an advocacy organization. And donations to us are tax deductible. You can also support us by purchasing items on the table back there once this is over, hint, hint. And just also, again, encouraging people to get involved, volunteer, and in any way possible. Support takes many forms. And this is just an example. If you didn't think that you could purchase or wear anything by us, just look at some of the people who wear our stuff. This is an example of a Latina woman, a white woman, and Bridget, who, of course, is my sister. So just if you didn't think that it was possible to support our organization, it is. And so these are some of the things that you can do. Of course, it's not the overly exhausting list, but again, just taking these into consideration, and not just taking them into consideration, actually doing something to change the way we think and change what we do in this community. So here are a few resources and references. A couple of years ago, I mentioned CNN not too long ago. There was an article that I wrote, an op-ed piece called Confessions of a Black Atheist, in which I do discuss the dynamic of the Black community, why it can be more challenging to openly identify, and also the work we've been doing with Black nonbelievers. Also, Contradiction, A Question of Faith by Jeremiah Kamara. If you aren't familiar with this gentleman, he has written 2 books, one called Holy Lockdown, Does the Black Church Limit Progress? And also The New Doubting Thomas. He also produced this documentary called Contradiction, which was circulated. It's available on Amazon Prime, just as an FYI. He's working on a new documentary called Holy Hierarchy, The Religious Roots of Racism. He's also going to be one of the speakers for our 2018 convention at sea, and there is more information on the table in the back once this is done. If you like more information on that, I'll be more than happy to give it to you. You also have Moral Combat and other books by Sakibu Hutchinson, who also is on the cover of the Humanist magazine. I'm going to hold this up again. And also, Black Nonbelievers has a YouTube channel where we have featured some presentations from our previous events. We are very event-based. We have produced, again, our own content, and we have contributed to the content of other organizations, as well as content for our members and anyone else who is interested. So now we're talking about 7 years of an organization, 7 years of progress. Whereas before, you may not have seen the caller who said that she doesn't understand why there aren't more Black atheists or openly identified Black atheists. This has been part of the work that we have been doing since 2011. In addition to growing and developing the organization, in addition to having a husband who has sickle cell anemia, by the way, and 3 children, I was also working a full-time job at the Centers for Disease Control. In March of this year, I made a very crucial decision to resign from that job to take on activism full-time, because it is where it was determined that my time and my efforts were needed. So in doing that, I created a Patreon where I post weekly entries on community building, as well as some of my more unorthodox personal thoughts. You can't just go on the Patreon and search it. You have to have the exact link, because it does contain adult content. And what this does, it helps me to support my activism. Black Nonbelievers, though we have gained more support over the past few years, is still volunteer for me and our organizers. I also am now one of the co-hosts of Parenting Beyond Belief, which is put on by the Atheist Community of Austin. I co-host a quarterly radio show in the Atlanta area, and it's everything atheism related. I do serve on a couple of boards, one of which is American Atheist. And so a lot of my time has gone into and does go into this movement. And it does need to be supported. There is just no other good way of saying that. And so getting back to the fear aspect, hopefully in these next few years, there won't be as much of an issue regarding why there needs to be more Black atheists. And also, I can only hope that people's attitudes and their perceptions of who they see as the authorities in this community will start to change. There is often a default as to who is seen as the effective leaders and who are the effective spokespersons. That needs to change. And so hopefully that is not rooted in fear, and hopefully there is no fear behind trying to produce more of us in sufficient leadership, and also with normalizing the stigma of atheism in the community. We have some work to do, but there is a lot that we can do in order to overcome and overturn those fears and continue the support and efforts that are needed in this community for all of us. Thank you. And I'll just say that for the Patreon, you can subscribe for as little as $1 a month. So please feel free, if you are on the website, please take a look. There are some public posts there. If you like what you see, do consider becoming a supporter, and also do consider becoming a regular supporter of Black Nonbelievers. Thank you. So yes, I think we have some time if there are any questions that you may have. There's time for questions. Okay.
it's on.
What are your thoughts and feelings about non-black individuals setting up local black atheist community groups?
So the question was, what are my thoughts on non-black individuals setting up organizations for black non-believers? I think there is definitely room for support in that. I think it is important for black folks to be representing in leadership in black non-believers as well as in other organizations. I do think, though, that we welcome participation and support from everyone, though. So if you like to get involved, if you'd like to help set up, we can definitely talk about that. Again, I do think it is important for the representation to reflect the community and the demographic, but certainly the support and participation and input from non-black folks is important. Yeah, and welcomed. Yes.
I don't even know quite how to word this. How do you land an interview with Playboy?
Oh, well, so that was actually, the question was how did I land an interview with Playboy? So at the American Atheist Convention, the writer, who was actually a former pastor, attended the convention. I wasn't the only one interviewed. So you had the legal team from the American Atheist staff was interviewed. There were a number of people who were interviewed for the article. Also, Gail Jordan out of Tennessee was interviewed. There were just a few of us who made the cut for the final article, though. And I'm happy to say that I was one of them. And I had no idea that he was gonna make that statement, but I'm glad he did. So there were a number of people who were interviewed, and it just so happened that he was there and writing an article, which does make for great publicity. Yes.
I was just wondering about your history. Did you grow up as an atheist, or have you always lived in the church?
Okay, so the question is my history and my background and my upbringing. So I wasn't formally raised religious. I was, my parents, I consider myself a bit fortunate. My dad grew up religious, he hated church. And my mother, my mom's side of the family, my maternal grandmother, whenever we would have gatherings, never prayed over any food. Or never, it was, holidays were always celebrated from a secular perspective. When it came to Easter, it was about the Easter bunny and the eggs and the candy. And so I was also raised in what is considered the Black nationalist and Black conscious community. So I learned a lot about Black history and culture growing up. I learned a lot about systemic injustice and racism growing up, which even within the Black community is still very seldom heard of. I knew who Malcolm X was before Martin Luther King. So my background was very, very radical, very, very outspoken, and just learned it very much about learning and implementing the critical thinking process. It's something that I use, when I raise my children. I mean, I was still indoctrinated though, because really, that background encourages you really to hate all white people. It really does. There's just no getting around that. It creates a major distrust for the white community. Now, again, understanding the systemic aspect is very important, but I had to unlearn this idea that all white people were inherently evil. And I had to look at people on an individual basis and look at their actions as opposed to just who they were. Because then I would be no better than these institutions that had historically done that to the Black community. So yes, that was my upbringing. Yes, Matt.
This is a little weird. Black atheists in Atlanta. Are they still around and are they still problematic?
The organization is not, so Matt's question was Black Atheists of Atlanta. There was a group that was formed in 2011, almost synonymous, like a few months after ours, when we were still local to Atlanta. And these guys, they were guys, They were very homophobic, very separatist in nature. And once we found out that part about them, we quickly disassociated, because Black non-believers as an organization is very pro-LGBT, very pro-reproductive rights, very pro-sexuality, very, very pro-progression. Now these guys, this organization in particular isn't, they aren't, the organization itself isn't around, but there is a rise in the what is considered the RBG, atheists, these Black guys who are still very sexist, still very misogynistic, they're still very homophobic. So they still have their little communities and their people that they promote. So they're around very loosely. I think there's a lot of, within the Black atheist sect, those who still aren't willing to undo those actions. So they're still around. They're not involved with us though. But that organization in particular has since dissolved.
You got it wrong once.
Yes.
Once.
And that is where the information comes in, and that's why it's good not to assume, again, that we all think alike or that we do everything the same, because we are still, even as atheists and within the community, there is a lot of conditioning and damage that people are still dealing with that some haven't dealt with. And they're trying to push it in a very unhealthy manner. And it's a matter of filtering and managing that, that has been very important to the growth of our organizations. And I encourage everyone, if you have someone that is problematic within your organization, that you have to take a stand and you have to actually effectively manage. If they are going to be a deterrent for women in your groups, for people of color in your groups, it is okay to manage and even filter them out if necessary. Yes. No, I can hear you. I'll just repeat I'll repeat the question back.
Okay. So, one thing I've noticed that's extremely problematic, especially on YouTube with YouTube atheists, is that they will say that they're secular and skeptical, and yet they start smashing down on groups like I believe in, like Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. And I'll get in debates and talks with my friends about it, and they'll just start shutting me down and telling me it's a terrorist organization. And as a white guy, I struggle with arguing and supporting on behalf of Black people, and I don't want to talk over Black people, and it's hard to represent their position.
Right. Well, the thing is if you know someone who has good information about Black Lives Matter,
right.
As a white person, it is good to defer to those people of color who are speaking. And it is okay to check other white people on that. I mean, that is definitely okay to do. Unfortunately, being atheist doesn't always mean that you're a skeptic or even a humanist. Or that there are a lot of people who speak from ignorance and privilege on these issues that they don't, even if they don't necessarily care about them. Right. It's extremely unfortunate that this happens. But I think a good thing to do is to be armed with people who, and the activists, know who the activists are within that community. And if you would like to help out or even engage with them, do that, because I find that extensively arguing with people who fail to understand is a waste of time. So it's, it takes up a lot of energy, and it also takes away from the work. So I would say not only just defer to them, but also work more with them.
Right, because I noticed that a lot of atheists seem to kind of carry their Bible beliefs with them subconsciously without realizing that they're still racist and sexist and
that's what I said.
So, thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, David. Oh. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Mandisa. First of all, congratulations on what you've done. I mean, I think it's great, the community that you've built here. As you will know, my interest is a lot in community building as well. I kind of have experience of further north in Canada and further south in the Caribbean. So I have two basic questions. I know there's a lot of challenges, and I was saying amen to a lot of those things. What do you think has been the biggest challenge that you have faced? And if you had to do it again, any lessons learned, anything that you can say you would do differently to get to where you are now?
I think I'll answer the second question first. Because of the impact that Black non-believers has had within the community and the way we've grown it and managed it, I don't think I would do much differently. I think that it all within that community building process is a process. And we deal with people, we're dealing with people. And so in that, there's a lot of, there's some trial and error in that. And I can say that with, because of my background in hospitality and management and also in leadership, I've been able to filter some things. I think I might perhaps tell some people some things in maybe a less nicer way about where they can go. Because there have been some very, very, I think the challenge that I face the most is sufficiently trying to get people to consistently support what we do. And I know that that is something that many of our organizations deal with, and people deal with in the community. And also this idea that, that the solutions are just gonna fall out of the sky. I think a lot of atheists, and Black atheists in particular, take that with them, that somehow there is going to be this magical thing where we, that our problems may be, it has been very, important for them they have to support our organizations and our groups. And so I guess trying to help people sufficiently understand. And also this idea that, subconsciously that my voice as a Black woman is somehow less important than that of a white guy. That does continue to be an issue at times. And also just just less than a man, period. So we still continue to deal with that. But I think the way we've been able to filter through that and also grow the voices of our members, as well as what we've contributed to the community, has been well worth it and outweighs the negatives. Yes. Yeah, do you want to come up to the mic so you can hear it? Sorry, thank you. Yes. No, it's okay.
From a point of ignorance. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to share anecdotally my experience, right? So I come from a family that's loosely Christian. They still hang on to their beliefs, right? But my parents are split, and I can kind of talk more to my mother, mm-hmm. and I can get points across to her. And it's I think that people coming from a point of ignorance are listening, but they take a lot of patience and love to like push it through, right? Because if I had given up whenever I got resistance, it could have set a divide. But for me personally, I saw that when I kept pushing and I kept talking about like, I don't want to go off on tangents, but different issues, mm-hmm. Like with the statues and all those kinds of things, and started pushing why it's important, mm-hmm. and breaking it down away from a point of like a racial divide, but look at the history, look at what was happening, why they were there, look at the Black Lives Matter movement and where it's coming from, and your perception of, I guess, well, all lives matter, right, was the response, and you're missing the point. you're totally missing the point.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that that voice wasn't going to be heard, but it did eventually get through. And I just wanted to share anecdotally, like, sometimes people are listening even though they don't look like they're listening.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that might be a good way to try to get through to the people that are so, dense is not a fair word to use, right? But they're resistant. And so, especially since free thinking involves questioning things that you're very comfortable with, I do think repetition and continuing to like push them is.
Okay, yes, I get what you're saying there. And I do leave that up to individuals though, because if I am a person of color and there is someone who is, for example, there have been white atheists in this community online who have said, well, they don't understand the need for black non-believers and that our groups are racist. And so upon giving the explanation, they still want to push back. I'm not going to bend over backwards to continuously tell these people the need for our groups. We will continue to do what we do, but trying to get them to understand isn't necessarily at the top of my priority list, but I do understand what you're saying, that yes, even if they may not take the information now, later on down the road, they may continue. And that's how many atheists, that's how many former believers became atheists. Through, through either, being defensive at one time, but then also, perhaps, continuing to listen or hear other people. So yeah, that part, but there are times where you cannot just meet, or there are just times when resistance needs resistance. And I think it's, that is a personal thing for some people.
Right.
But yeah.
And so my experience is with a personal relationship with an individual,
Mm-hmm.
not a stranger too. So it's very different.
Okay.
But yeah, I feel like a personal responsibility, right, for people that I know to push against.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So you spoke about how not being a man has made things more difficult for you, and I certainly understand that. Are there ways that you feel like being a woman has been advantageous in your work?
Well, I think because of the fact that the perception that all black women are religious, or most black women are religious, I think that my perseverance in growing the organization, asserting my identity, talking about atheism, talking about how atheism or religion has affected the black community. I think that, and as a woman, as a mother, as a manager, as an organizer, I have the ability to think about a bigger picture. And I think that, and that doesn't, I don't want to speak to this stereotype of women being the nurturers, right? Because that certainly isn't true for all of us. But I do think that it has been advantageous for me to be that very strong, assertive black woman atheist that many people still don't think exists. Because we are out here. And it's not just me being a living example. Again, there are 4 other women on this cover who are living examples of that. And so I think that we are now pushing not just the narrative, we are pushing the demographics into a more positive direction. Hello.
So I'm not atheist, my husband
Okay.
is, and I came here with him. But
Thank you for supporting him.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm not religious either, so I'm very open-minded. And I have a question now that you had mentioned that, is because I have a lot of black women friends.
Uh-huh.
And in my thinking, they always have Jesus to turn to. So who do they turn to when they don't have Jesus? And if they're thinking, trying to think outside of, well, where's my stronghold?
Mm-hmm.
what would you suggest? So, you know, if I could talk to one of my girlfriends, how would I get an idea across to her? Because she grew up in a black church.
And she thinks that Jesus is her rock, her Lord and Savior, and everything else. Yes. So first I would gauge, you know, how open-minded they could be. And that's, you know, on an individual basis. But I would also ask them, well, how close are they to their families? And what are the things that they have accomplished in their lives? Because one point of view that I've always found to be helpful is looking from within. So when you're talking about religious belief, you're taught, you're conditioned to look at something from without, that you by yourself are not strong enough to handle these problems, you give them to God. So you could ask the question of, you know, what do they do, you know, for themselves? And how strong do they think they are, you know, with themselves? And also, you know, the family, who is around them, who helps them and supports them, what roles do they play in their lives? Hopefully asking those questions will help them understand that it isn't just their belief in Jesus or God. It's also people around them who support them that deserve credit for that too. And also that they need to give themselves the credit. You know, more often than not, you know, especially as Black women, you know, we are taught to be these strong individuals and have to take so much. We have to take so much crap. And it's okay to own it. It's okay to, you know, it's okay to say, well, you know, I did this. So maybe asking those questions as a starting point as to who has been beneficial in their lives. So, yes. Oh, no, like I said before, these are, now our organization is just a US-based organization, but you also have the London Black Atheists, who has formed a group in London. Now, traditionally, you know, in Europe, we've seen that Europe is becoming more secular. There are a lot of people who are leaving the churches behind. When it comes to communities of color, though, where there are still very highly religious, and there's also been racial disparities, there are still a lot of challenges that Black atheists face across the world. And so there was a need to start a group there as well. You also have, there's a Nigerian atheist. There are secular groups that are popping up for people of color around the world because of the very, very highly religious aspect that comes from being in our communities, as well as some of the racial and the colonialization and such. So that plays a huge role. Yes. Hi.
Thanks for the talk. I was gonna have a question, but I think I'll just switch it to an anecdotal kind of response to that, to her question. I remember I'm originally from Jamaica.
Okay, I hear it.
And I remember growing up, I grew up very religious myself, even though, funny, I always had questions, but just never got answered. But I remember growing up to see how the religion affects the Black community, or non-religion affects the community. I remember I just remember the person's name because I just had the conversation. There was this lady called Christine Hewitt, and she was a Black atheist in Jamaica, and she had her own TV program and stuff, and she was very vocal about it. And when I was like 10, she was murdered, and like her body burned in her car. And so it was a very visual, like very public, like execution basically. And I remember a lot of churches were very vocal and saying, yeah, she deserved to die because she didn't believe in God. So yeah, God brought this wrath upon her, basically. I also remember being in high school, and one of my classmates, a Black woman also, had written this an essay on why she didn't believe in God. And I remember at the time the English teacher, this was for English class, and the English teacher read the essay out loud, and obviously the class was like very like, oh my God, like how could you possibly not believe in God? And they very vocally ostracized her. The teacher even admitted, she was like, I was thinking of like failing you on the spot, but I did speak with my other teachers, and through discussion, she did decide to give her an A for the essay, but she did admit that she was like, no, because this is blasphemy, basically. So, I mean, there is a need, not just, oh yeah, we want to just live our lives, but there are very dangerous repercussions of people who, through their radical beliefs, have attacked non-believers, or just people. I mean, Jamaica also has problems with homophobia and stuff like that as well. So, I mean, luckily in Jamaica there are like, because of Facebook and because of social media, there are actually quite a growing group of secularist humanists, but it's because of like people who are like, no, we're not gonna take this. This is a human injustice. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. The representation does matter. You know, who is representing atheism, secular humanism, secularism, period. It does matter. Yes.
Thank you for the talk, and thank you for my wife attending. I love you.
Thank you. Yes.
So I know we don't all have the common background, you know, like we probably should. But I know that you expressed that you still had religious family. So that's kind of like one of my things. It took me a long time to come out to my best friend. It's still, and also my mother, I came out to her.
Yeah.
But my father, my sister, and I'm just barely starting to kind of get out to my daughters.
Oh, wow, okay.
So I don't know, I don't want to get to end of life circumstances and still have my father think of myself as even kind of a believer.
Yeah.
But how would you suggest I deal with my sister and my father, or how did you, basically?
It may have to be step by step, definitely, and I encourage everyone who is going through this to go at the paces that are comfortable for you. You know, I don't want you to feel like you should have to broadcast that to everyone, but if you think, if you know that there is going to be some discomfort there, I would say kind of gauge that in steps. But I do think it might be important to outline your wishes. Like, it is important for all atheists to start outlining end-of-life wishes so that when that time comes, your family is not painting you as a believer. So those things will need to be discussed at some point. If you're very close, you know, with your family, if you think that, because I mean, it's interesting because those who you thought may have been the most supportive could possibly turn on you or not. But again, it's important to gauge the family members and gauge that process and also gauge your comfort level, because your dad, it may be, depending on how you feel about it, he may never be able to accept that. Like, I will never have this conversation with my 89-year-old grandmother. It's just not something that I would do. But if your family is involved and if you're very, very close to them, there might be some things you would definitely need to discuss with them, but you have to gauge your comfort level first. Also engage your own the local secular groups to see what they have gone through with their loved ones. So again, there's no like one right solution for that, but I always encourage people to, reflect and take in your own comfort level, as well as gauging where you think those family members might be, and try to talk to the ones who you think might be the most open first, because that might help with the others. Yes. And remember that it is more about your well-being than theirs. Because as long as you are comfortable with where you are, then what they think ideally shouldn't matter, even though you want to be considerate of them, but ultimately you are the one that needs to take care of you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right. Sorry, as I'm stepping on things, I'm probably going to break things. So, hi everyone. My name is Phil. I'm not sure if a lot of y'all know me or not. Who knows? But I want to take a little bit of time to thank you for coming here today to give this talk in the first place. It's a lot of information. It's a lot of important information that people need to hear. But I also wanted to thank you for being a representative, willing to be a representative on a national stage, and actually, putting your face out there, putting that out there, because that representation, as you mentioned before, really matters to, those in the African American community, those in the atheist community at large. That representation really makes a difference. And I wanted to piggyback on one of the topics you discussed about the crippling effects that religion has had on the African American community in particular. But my grandmother, for example, she was religious all her life. Was up until her end just a few years ago. But I remember when she started going into her decline, we had no idea that things were so wrong. But the church that she had gone to, multiple days per week, going there for decades, walking there, driving there, whatever else. But when she was walking home, she got lost on the way home. And that's when we first knew something was wrong. But the way that she grew up, the way that her parents kind of instructed her, is that doctors were something that you don't go to see. In her opinion, it was, all you need is that good Jesus. And that's what will get her through. And so she didn't let anyone know that anything was going on.
Yeah.
Here we go. Trying to focus. Here we go. But along with that, hiding her pain and hiding any problems, we didn't know that she also had cancer at the same time.
Gosh.
And she never said anything to anyone, because if she did, she has a lot of children, including my dad. And of course, they would try to take her to the hospital. She would refuse to go. If they wanted her to go, it was only when something serious happened, where she would have to be carted out or whatnot, where she wouldn't have a choice in the matter. And even when she was there, she would want to get out as quickly as possible, because she did not want to be there. That's not something that she trusted. It's not something that she wanted to do. It's not how she was raised. And I'm glad that things are changing now with the younger generation. So in my family, they're much more apt to go, not necessarily for mental health. That's still a taboo type of subject, but having representation out there, being Black atheists on a larger face, to let not only people that are other African American atheists know that, hey, we're here and it's okay to say that you are too. But it's also for people that are still religious, for them to actually know that there actually are Black atheists, that you can still be, a card-carrying African American person and not be religious, or not have to subscribe to a church or whatever else on that side. And, I doubt that would have helped anything in her case, but I always wonder how, if her religious background was different, if she would have been okay when her short-term memory started lapsing. Actually going to check that out, versus just kind of burying it beneath the sand, not letting anyone know until something happened and someone realized that she was missing, and someone in the neighborhood found her lost and disoriented. So coming back. So like I said, I just wanted to thank you for being out there, and there's more representation that's needed, and it's a worthwhile thing, and that's when I do what I do, a lot of it, along with my volunteerism, which is my just passion to the side, but being out there and actually representing and just letting other people know that there is another way that's there, that we are here, that it's okay to be you, and it's okay to question. So I want to thank you for that, for being, that beacon out there on the Atlanta side and now on the national stage, being out there, being here in ATX, sharing that. So I just want to thank you for that.
Oh, thank you, Bill, and thank you for that. I think a lot of what we can do as atheists and non-believers, those who put our trust in the scientific method and methods that actually work, that is how we can show our love for human beings, hopefully encouraging more people to get the help they need, even if they don't think as we do. Because I'm not going to help you simply because you're not an atheist. I will help you because I know it is something that is needed, and hopefully with that open identification, we can continue to break that stigma and hopefully help people understand that being good is not just associated with God. So, how much more time? Okay, hello.
I have a question that might not be answerable right now, but I was wondering, so I'm also of Jamaican descent, and in Jamaica, about 20% of people are non-believers, but you have some of the same problems of, if you were to look at the problems that you listed of why it might be so prevalent in America, those still exist in Jamaica. So I was wondering, is there actually more to it, or is there something to look at as to why it's higher in the Caribbean?
Well, again, the United States and the Caribbean went through the same transatlantic slave trade. So that was, the Christianity was a conditioning there as well. And when I mentioned the link for atheism in the African diaspora, this is something that is a concern and a problem throughout the world with African descendants, like direct African descendants, and that includes the West Indies. A lot of our experiences are very, very similar. It isn't just like within the United States. I'm not sure how many in the community will actually start to reconsider those beliefs, but it will take those of us who do identify to start building and connecting and hopefully building those bridges to start turning that around. But the dynamics are very, very similar because the conditioning happened in the Caribbean as well. That's another reason why there's a very, very high religious population there. It is very much similar to the United States. So we're all kind of fighting the same fight here for people who aren't necessarily aware of that experience when it comes to Black communities in the United States, the Caribbean, in Europe, Canada, everywhere. Most of our experiences are the same with dealing with extremely high religious communities, as well as a lack of understanding amongst the secular populations that are non-POC. So just understand, I'm glad that there are more here to really help understand and show that, yes, we are dealing with these things throughout the world. And this is why there was a need for our organization and a need for us to particularly show that there are more Black non-believers and more people of color that are openly identified as atheists.
Hello.
Hey.
First of all, thank you. It was a wonderful lecture. And also thank you to the ACA. Y'all's outreach programs and all have reached us in Arkansas. So that's one of the reasons we were able to be here and see you. So this was a great lecture. You had a couple of interesting points. One of them was you touched on the wealth accumulation by the donations to the church within the Black community, as well as Black women being the foundation, kind of the backbone of the church. And just thinking of those two things, how you can judge a community, like the health of a community by, a lot of people have said it and we can agree the empowerment of women is one of those issues you want to really tackle and bring women up. So especially with women being kind of the large backbone within the Black community of the church, how does the strategy change? We know that obviously we want to empower women, but how does it change specifically to empower them and kind of remove them from the church? You kind of see where I'm coming out with that?
So what's been interesting is that the church has been refining its marketing techniques. You know, years ago, it used to be the fire and brimstone. You're going to go to hell if you don't believe. You're going to go to hell automatically, you know, if you are LGBT or what have you. So now many churches are starting to refine their messages. Now there are more women pastors, you know. Now it's okay to be a woman and a pastor, because I think there is a certain segment that the church is losing. So, and then plus there are a lot of men who don't really, you know, aren't interested in the church really, probably not unless they're in leadership, but, you know, there is still this idea that many, you know, men are not going to, you know, subject themselves to that level of submission. So, but I think what it does is it may empower women within that community to show that they can take what they can from those religious beliefs and then still, you know, make it something of themselves. I don't necessarily agree with that doctrine of it because it's still, you know, again, the doctrine itself hasn't changed, but the marketing has changed. The marketing has. But I think what's happening now is that as more women, especially as more Black women are, you know, asserting themselves. You know, there are a lot of people who think that the feminist movement is just so horrible, right? You know, we're not supposed to be empowering and encouraging women. But I think what it does to get more women involved is to start thinking of, you know, more of the entire family, more of what's good for everyone as opposed to just one person. Again, I don't pretend to understand all of the dynamics of the Black church. I personally think that it is an institution that does need to die out and go away. But I think that some have been taking some of the, you know, they've refined the messages to be more empowering and more encouraging to women, even though you can still find something that subjugates. But it's a matter of picking and choosing, you know, what they want.
It's interesting. I really appreciate your speaking. My first friend that I had that was openly atheist happened to be a Black woman.
Okay.
I had no idea that this was a thing. I didn't know, and thank you for opening my eyes. Appreciate it. As I stand here realizing that I am pretty much the quintessential snapshot of privilege, I would like to know how, it's kind of a twofold question. How do I get myself over that hump of, you know, I want to wear the shirt, I want to be involved, I want to, all of the things. How do I get myself over that hump of, yeah, I'm kind of stepping into somebody else's thing that I'm, meddling in. And number two, how do I respond to somebody who accuses me of stepping in the middle of something that is not really mine?
Well, I would say you get past that by remembering that it is about all of us. That this is a demographic that needs support, and you're supporting us. You're supporting it. If there may be people who might say, well, there are a lot of white people who wear Black Lives Matter shirts. That's totally fine. What they're doing is they're supporting the cause, they're supporting the organization, and they're supporting the mission. And also you're letting people know that, hey, there is this organization that is helping to bring out more Black atheists. I am happy to support them. That is just plain and simple. Yeah, so overcoming that means that, it's not just about your discomfort, if there is some, which is understandable, but knowing that you are helping the entire community by supporting and wearing that, and you're creating awareness. So that which is a good thing. All right, we're getting ready for the back cruise. I know I'm looking forward to it, and thank you all once again